thank you so much for joining us, Nicholle. Nicholle is a very successful 3L at Harvard Law School. She is also a superstar on TikTok and frequently records her adventures at Harvard Law School on her TikTok account. And we're very happy to have you here and ask you a little bit about your law school journey.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and to share whatever I can to everyone.
Great. So Nicholle, I wanted to start just by asking the question that you probably get a lot, which is, how did you get into Harvard Law School? And do you have any tips for people who might also be seeking to go to Harvard Law School or a similarly ranked law school?
Sure. It's definitely a question I get asked frequently, but I'm really glad. I think for myself, I didn't have a straightforward path to law school. And I think that sometimes students think you have to in order to get to, a top law school like I did. Just going way back in time, I was a low income first gen student. Neither of my parents went to college. And in my hometown, people did not go to fancy schools, nor did they go to law schools. And I spent so much of my life believing someone like me didn't get to go. I went to college, I was an English major. I didn't really have my eye on law school again, thinking that because of the college I went to, which was Cal State Fullerton, it just wasn't a possibility. The counselors didn't talk about it. And when I did think about law school, even shortly, they asked or they just recommended I apply to a place down the street. And there's nothing wrong with that, but given my GPA and potential for a good LSAT score, I found it to be quite limiting. I ended up working for 3 years in continuing medical education, not at all related to what I wanted to do as far as law school now. And it was in that I learned what I liked and disliked about a job and what I wanted in a career. And that gave me the motivation to apply, to take the LSAT first of all, and then to apply. As far as what got me into Harvard, I think that question is so difficult to answer just because so many people apply and the percentage that get in is so small. I do know, and I have had great fortune of speaking directly with the director of admissions, Christy Jobson, and I know that they really attempt to shape a class. They want a class that balances one another, that brings diverse perspectives and experiences. And with that in mind, I really tried in my applications for all schools, Harvard included, to be extremely transparent about my background and very vulnerable in sharing really what I thought made me unique, the struggles I'd overcome. Not using them, to create a sad story, but to create a narrative of how much I'd overcome and really how that progress in that journey would contribute really valuable insight in the classroom, and how I thought that my background would be really would resonate well with clients in ways that I think sometimes students from more privileged backgrounds don't necessarily have the same experiences. And I think through that honesty, and also through my interviews, similar honesty, I believe that really allowed my application to stand out probably amongst the crowd. I didn't have a LSAT that was, the 75th percentile or anything like that. I did have a high GPA, but all to say, I think my advice to anyone who's applying, regardless of the level of school you're applying to, is to make every piece of your application stand on its own, meaning that nothing should be duplicative. Every part of that application should be building a narrative. At the end of your application, a reviewer should be able to look at it and they should be able to have an answer to why you over anyone else with the exact same scores as you. Like, why are you someone who should stand out among the crowd? And only you can answer that. Everyone has their own narrative, their own it factor. But the more you can be transparent and the more honest you can be, I think that goes very far when they're only reading about you on paper.
That is really, really good advice to keep in mind for anybody applying either to Harvard Law School or any law school. The application is such a key part of it, and being transparent and making sure that every part's kind of standalone, building on the narrative is critical. So thank you for sharing that. What surprised you most about law school?
Wow. I think so. I knew law school was going to be difficult, and I knew, particularly going from a Cal State school, where I at the time had felt a bit like a big fish in a small pond, I knew that Harvard was going to be a challenge. I don't know if I necessarily understood how grueling the first year can be, particularly here. I know we're not the only law school, but not every school does that. Harvard petitions the ABA for us to take more units than the cap. So our first year, each semester, we're taking 18 units. I had worked throughout undergrad, and so I didn't work my first semester of law school. And so I figured, I was like, I got this. Like, I've always had to juggle so many things. And your first semester, particularly, it's really focused on school. But going to class every day with the same people, it creates beautiful camaraderie, but it's also quite challenging to like have these difficult conversations with people and sit across from them day after day after day, knowing at the end of the semester you're also all competing for against one another in some capacity for, a curved grading system. But despite all of that challenge, I don't know if I understood how transformative law school was going to be. I changed so much in undergrad, sure, 18 to 22. But I look back now on my time in law school and I am so proud of what I've accomplished, but also I feel so capable. I know that there's no problem, like there's not a problem I don't feel like I could solve, or I know who to ask for to help solve it. And that kind of agency and that kind of confidence is something that I saw in lawyers when I was younger and really admired, but didn't necessarily know how to get there myself. And so being able to reflect back, and I think, between the challenges of law school, the rigor, the breadth of information you're collecting, and then really the skill set you end up developing, I knew I would become a lawyer. I didn't know that I would also gain all of this confidence and this agency. And that has been one of the most exciting parts looking back across my time here.
That is really nice to hear. A lot of people, and I know this was true for me before I went to law school, is you say, oh, I'm going to law school, and then you hear all this negativity and, oh, it's so hard. And, but you don't hear of any of the benefits that come from going through that kind of grueling or challenging environment, even if it's not always, grueling. You don't hear that like, oh, when I come out, I'm more confident. I have this like agency. I feel like I have all these skills that I didn't have before. And that's very nice to hear. What's one thing that you wish you knew before starting your first year of law school?
It's hard to narrow it to one thing. So this is like 1 and 1A, 1B. I think overarching, nobody knows what they're doing. Like even if the student sitting next to you is like a legacy from like 10 years, 10 generations back, what have you, like no one actually knows because no one has been a law student before. And so it can be very easy to get intimidated when you hear how many hours someone spent in the library, or the fact that they're reading the supplemental documents or textbooks in addition to the assigned reading. And I think I came in at 25-ish, and so I expected to kind of be able to stay above that. And it's very difficult, again, when you're with the same people every day, to not internalize and compare yourself to others, not to get in your head and feel, a sense of imposter syndrome, which everyone feels. But I think that's particularly true when you're a first generation student, when you come from a low income background and find yourself suddenly in this like elite environment. And so in that, I would say that I wish I could have reminded myself that no one knew what they were doing. And I needed to listen to what was best for myself. I know myself the best. I know how I study the best. I know how I learn the best. I know how much time I need away from school. I know how much sleep I need. And I really should stay in my own lane. And so when I'm advising, incoming law students here at Harvard, I tell them all, just stay in your own lane. No one, especially the first semester, is going to have it all figured out. So be flexible. Try out a study method. If that doesn't work, pivot. You're not married to it. And the same is true when you go into your second semester. And I think other than that, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think there's a lot of pressure at the beginning. You want to read everything, outline everything, stay up all night on the weekends. The thing is, your grade is all the way at the end of the semester. And that is really the only thing that matters for almost all courses in law school. And so if you burn out too soon, doesn't matter how well you know the subject, it's not going to reflect at the end when it really counts. And so really being able to build in rest, build in things that like keep your soul lifted despite, whatever might be happening there at school, so that when it comes to the exam, when it comes to the like thing that really counts, you have the energy to put forward to it. So all of that is to say, like, do you stay in your own lane, but do not burn out too soon, and figure out what that means for you.
That is really good advice. I feel like a lot of people forget that, and you go to law school and it's so easy to become lost in everything, and you don't realize you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You already have a study schedule and study tips and things that work well for you, and you don't have to just all of a sudden become somebody else. So that's a really good reminder. What is a typical law school day like for you at Harvard Law School?
I guess I should ask, do you want to know what it was like as a first year law student or what it's like now?
Ooh, that's interesting. I would like to know both.
Okay, definitely. So throwing my mind back a few years to when I was a first year, I was fortunate I was in person at the time. It was, I would wake up probably around 6 a.m. I would try to get a workout in because I knew for me, like my mental health is very dependent on moving my body from California. So coming to the East Coast with the weather is very different. So I was trying to build that in early. From there, depending on the day, my first class wasn't until 10. So if I had time, I would do some reading or review the cases for that morning in the library or in some of the study areas on campus. I'd then go to class, usually 2-hour time blocks. There would be a lunch break. At the time, we all had the same lunch hour at noon, so that you could go to lunch talks or you could attend student org meetings. And so I would usually attend that, get free food, which was lovely. And we had some incredible speakers come and speak to us. I had lunch with James Comey once. It was so outside of my realm prior that it was a little bit of pinch me almost every day. And then from there, I typically had an afternoon class. So I'd go that class for a 2-hour time block. And then I was in the library typically from 4, and I tried personally to get home by 8. I try to treat it like a job. And so home by 8, eat dinner, watch something on TV, cuddle with my cat, and try and get 7 hours of sleep. And that was repeated Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, typically a full day, Saturday of studying, half day on Sunday, and try to take a break Sunday afternoon. So that was a lot, especially when you're doing it, for 12 to 16 weeks. Now it's very different. Thinking back to just the last semester that I had, I know now about myself that I really thrive in hands-on based learning rather than sitting back and just having didactic lectures. I have ADHD, and so it's quite difficult to pay attention sometimes to courses. And so I really built my third year to be heavy on clinical work. We have a clinic here called the Criminal Justice Institute. And it's just an incredible clinic, but it's a very, very rigorous and time consuming. So what it is essentially, we serve as like this mini law firm, but we are court appointed counsel here in Boston Municipal Court for both misdemeanors and felonies for indigent clients. And we are their attorney. We practice under the bar license of our supervisor. We're the ones that speak in court. We're the ones that work with, the client themselves and create the strategy and take the case from arraignment to disposition. And so a day for me now is, it can be 2 hours in class, typically in the morning. And then I go and I work in the clinical office on motions or cross exams that I'm writing for trial until lunch. I eat lunch and I work through lunch typically. And then I will continue working on client work until probably 5, go home and finish reading around 7 for any of the courses that I am taking. If I have more client work, I will do so. But I guess to say it's so much more variable. So some days I'm in court, some days I'm half day in court, half day in class. I had to miss classes, sometimes for court. And so I loved it, but it is just so different than first year. And that is the beauty of law school, is really, you're kind of strapped in for the first year to what they've chosen for you. But from there, it's really a choose your own adventure. And so knowing yourself, being comfortable exploring, I think by the third year, you really find your groove and figure out how you want to spend your time.
That's really, really great to hear. And it sounds like even when you were talking about first year, what I really liked that you said is that you took breaks. It's not like you studied, 8 hours a day and you were up all night. You tried to take half a day Sunday off, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of law students will be happy to hear that that's possible to do. Sure. I did the same thing in law school. I took every Sunday completely off, actually. Mm-hmm. Needed that longer break for myself, but I think that that's important for people to hear. And it's really interesting how your last year of law school, it sounds like it's a lot of clinical work and client-based work and kind of a very variety of experiences that you're getting rather than just sitting in class all day, which is right. Like you said, the beauty of law school.
Yes, definitely.
And you kind of answered this question already, but I'll ask one more time. Do you ever take study breaks in law school? And then how often do you take study breaks and what do you do during your study breaks? Some people, like the idea of a study break is just stressful for them. And then they're more stressed out at the thought of taking a break rather than just incorporating it into their schedule.
Yes, I think my favorite question, honestly. And again, when I mentor first years, I'm a teaching fellow and I run a mentorship program, but this is like my biggest advice, which is rest is so important and it is part of your study routine. It is not in opposition to studying because, again, as I said earlier, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And like in a marathon, you're going to take water breaks, right? You're going to maybe need to stretch. It's about getting for the duration. not going nonstop until the point where you pass out mid-marathon. I'm going to end the analogy there. But the point is, I always tell people, if you are taking a break and during your break, you are focusing on the fact that you're not studying, you have lost time twofold. You have not rested, nor have you gotten work done. So what you need to do is to commit, I love to time block on my calendar. So I'm going to work from this time to this time, and then I'm going to have scheduled break from this to this. I also love reward-based systems. So if I get this done, I can do X. But when I'm doing whatever that break might be, whether that's watching Netflix, I'm going out for, food or drinks with friends, I'm going shopping, I'm quite literally just laying on my couch, whatever that might be, I'm wholeheartedly doing it. I am not thinking about the looming lists of tasks that I know are there, but they're going to be there no matter what. I'm allowing my brain to recover so that when I return to the work that is time blocked on my calendar, I am fully present, I am there, and I'm giving it my all. I've noticed in times where I have kind of fallen by the wayside of the scheduling plan or giving myself actual breaks, I might be working that whole time. In theory, I'm sitting in front of my computer, but I'm not productive. And I don't mean to call out friends of mine, but I would watch them in our first year not take breaks, and they were in the library for 12 hours. They weren't getting anything done. They were on their computer. They were taking breaks the whole time, but not calling them that. So neither were they resting, nor were they getting work done. I think, again, this goes back to what I said earlier. You will always have something to do in law school. My task list has never been done, but that prepares you for the real world, because that's what it's like to have a job. That's especially what it's like to be a lawyer and to have a very rigorous career. And so if you don't learn now, you will burn out in the profession itself. The profession is not kind in the sense of like, it is not meant to be a gentle profession. You have to learn to be kind to yourself and learn how to take those breaks. And it's going to differ for everyone, the length, how many. Some people like shorter breaks, but more frequently. Some people like longer breaks, but like at the end of the day, you'll have to figure out what works for you. But I cannot stress enough the importance of taking the breaks and honoring them. And if other classmates of yours say they're not taking breaks, they're probably lying. Or if they're not lying and they aren't taking breaks, they're not being efficient. It is not actual hours spent that you're not spending. So just earmuffs. I always tell people you have to have earmuffs. You can just be like, nice, very, very interesting story. Thank you. And then go on and do your own thing.
That is fantastic advice. That is fantastic advice. It's the best summary of breaks in law school I've heard.
Thank you. I'm honored. I feel very passionately about them, as you can tell.
I do too. So it's nice to hear you kind of reiterate the same thing, because people don't realize how important it is. And like you said, if people aren't taking breaks, then, they're actually not studying either. So you should be kind of finding that healthy balance there. What did you do this summer after your first year of law school?
Sure. The first summer, unfortunately, it was virtual, but I still had a wonderful experience. I knew that I was likely after graduation going to go to a law firm. And so I really wanted to spend the first summer doing something in the nonprofit realm that I was really passionate about. I, again, coming from Cal State Fullerton, had never had an easy time with hiring, even with, the accolades I'd achieved in undergrad. And so I really wanted to embrace what I knew was the Harvard name. And I have some pros and cons thoughts about this, but I was here and I wanted to really make it work for me. And I had always had a lot of passion, not necessarily in the legal basis, but just like politically and reproductive rights and reproductive freedom. And I knew that, there was a lot of work being done either by the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, some really, really major organizations. And so I applied at the first deadline, the December 1st deadline to, the major orgs, and was really fortunate to be offered a position at Planned Parenthood National. I was working in theory out of the DC office, though I was working here in my Cambridge bedroom. But I got to work for the litigation department of the national chapter of Planned Parenthood at a really interesting time when COVID was, sparking a lot of interesting policies in certain states, shutting down clinics. And at a time right now, as we know, we're at the Supreme Court, right? Like, obviously this was a bit early, but the June medical decision came out while I was working there. And so I got to kind of be a part of the, what we don't know what's going to happen. So prepping for A or B, the fallout of either. It was an incredible experience. I was able to walk away with a writing sample. So if you're somebody, and you don't need to know this yet, but if you decide that litigation is for you, litigation is very research and writing based. And so walking away from your first summer with a writing sample is super important. And so they were great in making sure I had one that was really interesting that I could talk about in interviews. And honestly, this is not really part of your question, but I do think it's super important. I was an English major, and so I thought I was an amazing writer, and I was. And I got to law school and I got into legal writing and I could not make it work for me. I just didn't understand it. I felt like I was hitting a wall over and over again. And it was heartbreaking because I knew I wanted to do litigation, but I knew this was a critical component of litigation. And so I'd ask my teachers for help and they weren't very helpful, and that's a different story. But I ended up finishing my first year not comfortable with writing. And I found myself in this internship. And I will just say that the first summer is so formative because you're practicing. They don't really expect you to know what you're doing, but they are giving you tasks and they're giving you the opportunity to learn. And at the end of the summer, I walked back here to law school so much more confident in my legal writing. And that has only gotten more true each experience I've taken on, whether that be research work, my second summer. And now I'm just like, I can do it. Like I find myself able to do it so naturally. And that is an amazing experience. But I say that just because if you're not good at something right away in law school, I don't necessarily think that means that you cannot pursue it as part of your career. I just think that like you really have to work at it, and don't get discouraged. And so I'm grateful for that first summer and all of the experiences I've had, just because of so much happens outside the classroom, especially when it's a profession like the law, which is really like apprenticeship based in a lot of capacities.
That sounds like a really interesting first summer. And it also sounds like you learned a lot, which is great. Just curious, did most of your classmates work at law firms after their first year of law school, or did a lot of them do kind of, I don't want to call it an alternative thing because it wasn't, but did they kind of go a different path after their first year, knowing that eventually they would end up at a law firm? And so, try to kind of vary their experience a little bit.
Absolutely. I think it's important to mention, right, and this is an unfortunate truth about the legal profession, is that it's extremely based on hierarchy. So the ability to go to a top law school really opens up opportunities maybe that wouldn't be open elsewhere. And even if they are open elsewhere, it opens much more easily and to a greater depth into the class. By like, if there's 500 students, you're able to go down into like the 300 or the 400 student, where maybe only the top 10% elsewhere. I say this because I think this informs my answer of what we ended up all doing. Most people did not go to law firms, and I think that is because there was an expectation that that was not necessary to secure an offer if you were interested in doing it your second summer. I think a lot of people aren't 100% certain what they plan to do, whether they plan to go through the interviewing program or not. And so by doing your first summer in public interest, it either A, gives you the opportunity, like for myself, getting to work on something that I probably won't get to work on in the future, or B, if you end up going the public interest route at a nonprofit, having that first summer, you need that for your second summer and so on, because you have to show a dedication to public interest. I think that there were a handful of people, our class was 500, maybe less than 100, who knew that they were doing corporate law, who knew they wanted to be, at a law firm, who had maybe been a paralegal or had done a fellowship prior. And so those students applied for the first year. But it's important to mention that the first year positions are so minimal to begin with, because so much is filled by first or by second years. That I think whether people wanted first years or not, I think there was a lot of just de facto, you were going to do nonprofit. And so I think that is it. But everyone did a huge breadth. So I was at a national nonprofit job, which is amazing. I had friends at the smallest nonprofits working on very niche issues. And they got to do that, and that was amazing. So there was again, it's a very choose your own adventure. And some people are going to say, if you want to do environmental law, you should do that all the way through. I have had such a wide variety, right? I did reproductive litigation work. I did health law clinic. I worked on contract-based research and writing and consulting litigation with a professor. Now I'm doing criminal law. My post-grad job will be in corporate litigation. And so I've not had a linear path, but it has all come full circle and always been something I can draw upon and use. And so my advice too for this whole summer experience is, don't feel like you have to have such a firm grip on this one path, because there are a lot to be learned in different avenues.
That's great advice. And I also think that a lot of people might go into law school thinking they want to do one thing, and then they end up with one of these experiences that you're talking about and end up very happy in a different field or practicing a different kind of law. So very, very interesting. If law students want to learn more about you and your law school journey, where can they find you?
Yes. So I am primarily, as far as public facing, on TikTok. I have an Instagram. So that's also, they're the same handle. It's Nicholle Patricia. I have a very interestingly spelled name. So maybe we can put it somewhere so that they can find it, because searching it the normal way is not going to work. But yes, so I do make TikTok videos. I try to go live. It's been much harder in my third year to make time for things the way that I could during virtual school as a 2L, but I'm always open. My DMs on Instagram are open, and I try to answer them and give as much personal advice as I can. But and my email is also found on my Instagram. So if someone wants to send me an email, that's an option as well.
Thank you so much, Nicholle. That's super helpful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Of course, and thank you for asking me. And I just good luck to everyone who's watching. And I'm so excited for you and the future in the law.
Thank you, Nicholle.